Why people preferred the weaker version of you. Why do some people become uncomfortable when you finally become stronger? Why do they call you selfish when you begin setting boundaries, arrogant when you become more confident, and distant when you stop accepting behavior that once hurt you? The answer is often difficult to accept. Some people did not simply love who you were, they also benefited from the version of you who was uncertain, available, forgiving, and easy to influence. Perhaps you always answered immediately. You agreed to things you did not want to do. You avoided conflict, explained every decision, and accepted disrespect because you were afraid of losing the relationship. You may have believed that this made you kind, patient, or loyal. To another person, however, it may also have made you predictable. They knew that you would eventually give in. They knew that your guilt was stronger than your anger. They knew that even after crossing a line, they could rely on your fear of abandonment to keep you close. When you begin changing, they do not only notice a new personality, they notice the loss of an old advantage. This is why your growth can feel threatening even when you have done nothing aggressive. The stronger version of you is harder to control, harder to shame, and less willing to abandon themselves for someone else's comfort. 2. Growth breaks. The old agreement. Every relationship develops a pattern, even when nobody discusses it openly. One person may always make the decisions while the other adjusts. One person asks for favors while the other rarely asks for anything. One person becomes angry and the other rushes to repair the situation. Over time, these roles begin to feel natural. But they are not natural, they are simply repeated. The problem appears when one person changes. Suppose you stop apologizing for things that are not your fault. You begin taking longer before agreeing to requests. You stop answering messages the moment they arrive. You say no without writing a paragraph to justify it. To you, these changes may feel small. To the other person, they may feel like a complete disruption of the relationship. The old pattern worked because both people played their assigned roles. Once you stop playing yours, the other person no longer knows how to maintain theirs. Your growth has broken an agreement you never consciously made. This is why people sometimes say, "You have changed," as though change itself were evidence of wrongdoing. What they often mean is that you are no longer behaving in the way they had learned to expect. 3. Your boundaries feel like rejection. A boundary is simply a limit. It communicates what you are willing to accept, what you are able to give, and where another person's responsibility begins. But to someone who benefited from the absence of your boundaries, a limit can feel like rejection. If they were used to calling at any hour, your decision not to answer may seem cold. If they were used to borrowing money, your refusal may appear selfish. If they were used to making jokes at your expense, your objection may be described as oversensitivity. The behavior has not necessarily become worse. Your tolerance for it has changed. This distinction matters. People often judge your new boundary not by whether it is reasonable, but by how much access it removes from them. A person who loses unlimited access to your time may not see a healthy limit. They may see a punishment. This is why setting boundaries often produces more conflict before it produces more peace. The people around you need to discover whether your limit is real or temporary. They may test it, ignore it, argue with it, or try to make you feel guilty for having it. If guilt causes you to surrender, they learn that your boundary is only a request. If you remain consistent, they eventually have to adapt. 4. Confidence removes their advantage. An insecure person is easier to influence because they depend heavily on external approval. They need reassurance that they are good, lovable, reasonable, and worthy of belonging. This makes disapproval extremely powerful. Someone can control them with silence, criticism, disappointment, or the threat of leaving. They do not need to give direct orders. They only need to create enough emotional discomfort for the insecure person to change their behavior. Confidence weakens this mechanism. When you become more secure in your own judgment, another person's anger no longer automatically proves that you are wrong. Their silence no longer forces you to chase them. Their disappointment may still hurt, but it does not immediately control your decision. This can be deeply frustrating for someone who once used those reactions to influence you. They may say that you have become difficult. In reality, you have become less manageable. They may say that you no longer care. In reality, you no longer treat every negative emotion as an emergency you must solve. They may say that confidence has made you arrogant, but sometimes what they call arrogance is simply the moment you stop asking for permission to trust yourself. 5. They try to return you to your old role. When a familiar relationship changes, people often try to restore the previous pattern. They may bring up your past. They remind you of mistakes, insecurities, or old versions of yourself that no longer reflect who you are. They may joke about your new habits. If you become disciplined, they call you obsessed. If you stop drinking, they say you have become boring. If you begin taking your career seriously, they accuse you of thinking you are better than everyone else. These comments are not always carefully planned. Often the person is simply trying to make the relationship feel familiar again. Your growth has created uncertainty. They no longer know what you will tolerate, how you will react, or whether they still occupy the same position in your life. So they provoke the old response. They may start an argument because they expect you to apologize first. They may withdraw because they expect you to panic. They may criticize you because they expect you to defend yourself. If you react exactly as before, the old balance returns. If you do not, they realize that the relationship has genuinely changed. 6. Nietzsche and the fear of strength. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote extensively about strength, power, responsibility, and resentment. His idea of the will to power was not simply about controlling other people. It also described the drive to overcome resistance, shape one's life, and become more capable. This kind of strength can inspire people, but it can also disturb them. When someone becomes more disciplined, courageous, or independent, they create an uncomfortable comparison. Their growth suggests that change may have been possible for others as well. A person who is unwilling to face this possibility may try to redefine strength as something negative. Confidence becomes arrogance. Ambition becomes greed. Independence becomes selfishness. Emotional control becomes coldness. This is closely connected to Nietzsche's idea of ressentiment. When people feel unable to develop a quality, they may protect themselves by condemning that quality. Instead of admitting, "I wish I had the courage to set boundaries," they say, "Boundaries are cruel." Instead of admitting, "I am afraid to change my life," they say, "People who change become fake." By judging your growth as morally wrong, they avoid asking whether they should grow too. 7. Why growth is called selfishness. The word selfish is often used carelessly. Sometimes it describes genuinely harmful behavior, ignoring responsibilities, exploiting others, or treating people as though their needs do not matter. But in unhealthy relationships, selfish can mean something very different. It can mean that you are no longer placing another person above yourself. You decide not to lend money you cannot afford to lose. You are called selfish. You decline an invitation because you need rest. You are called selfish. You stop fixing problems that another adult repeatedly creates. You are called selfish. In each case, the accusation may have less to do with morality than with access. The other person has lost something they were accustomed to receiving. The strongest response is not to become defensive and prove that you are a good person. It is to examine your behavior honestly. Are you harming someone, or are you simply disappointing them? Are you abandoning a real responsibility or refusing a role that was never yours? Are you acting without empathy or finally including yourself among the people whose needs matter? Strength does not mean becoming indifferent. It means that compassion no longer requires self-erasure. 8. How people punish your growth. When persuasion fails, punishment often begins. This punishment may be obvious, but it is usually subtle. A person becomes cold after you say no. They stop inviting you. They gossip about you, mock your goals, or present themselves as the victim of your transformation. They may use silence to make you anxious. They may withhold affection, approval, or cooperation. They may become unusually critical, hoping that enough doubt will return you to your former behavior. Sometimes the punishment takes the form of a story. You become the difficult one. You become the person who changed. You become ungrateful, disloyal, arrogant, obsessed, or impossible to talk to. This story helps the other person avoid examining their own role in the conflict. If your strength can be framed as a character defect, then they do not have to admit that they preferred you without boundaries. The purpose of the punishment is often simple: to make growth feel more painful than surrender. If returning to your old role ends the conflict, you may be tempted to do it. But the peace you regain will be temporary, because it depends on betraying yourself again. 9. Resistance does not always mean you are right. There is an important warning here. Not every person who dislikes your behavior is threatened by your strength. Not every criticism is manipulation, and not every boundary is automatically healthy. People can become rigid, selfish, dismissive, or cruel while telling themselves that they are simply becoming stronger. Real strength includes self-examination. Ask whether your boundary is clear and proportionate. Ask whether you communicated it honestly or expected people to read your mind. Ask whether confidence has become contempt or independence has become avoidance. A trustworthy person may challenge you because they care about you, not because they need you weak. The difference appears in the pattern. Healthy criticism respects your dignity. It addresses specific behavior. It allows discussion and does not depend on humiliation. Manipulative resistance attacks your identity. It uses guilt, fear, silence, or punishment to force compliance. Your task is not to assume that every disagreement proves you are evolving. Your task is to separate honest feedback from pressure designed to restore an unhealthy dynamic. 10. The final lesson. Becoming stronger changes more than your internal life. It changes every relationship built around your former weakness. Some people will adapt. They may need time, but they will learn to respect your limits. They will understand that your independence does not mean rejection, and that your confidence does not reduce their value. Others will resist, because the relationship only worked when you were easier to control. This is one of the most painful discoveries of personal growth. You may realize that someone did not miss your kindness. They missed your compliance. They did not miss your presence. They missed your availability. They did not love your patience. They relied on your inability to leave. Nietzsche's lesson is not that you should become cold or suspicious. It is that strength reveals the hidden structure of relationships. When you stop apologizing unnecessarily, you discover who needed your guilt. When you set boundaries, you discover who benefited from their absence. When you trust yourself, you discover who preferred your doubt. The people who truly care about you may struggle with your growth, but they will not demand that you become weak again. And sometimes, the anger you receive after becoming stronger is not proof that you have become worse. It is proof that the old version of you is no longer available.